Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, an inquest jury has found failures across multiple agencies contributed to the death of Zara Alina in East London. Jordan McSweeney murdered the 35-year-old as she walked home from a night out in Ilford in June 2022. He'd been released from prison 9 days earlier. A member of the Labour Party has been suspended after a man was arrested by police investigating a honey trap plot in Westminster. He's been questioned on suspicion of harassment and online safety offences after MPs were targeted in a sexting scam. LBC's political editor Natasha Clark has more.
We have been told that the Labour Party was notified today of the arrest of a party member in Islington. They tell us that they have immediately administratively suspended the individual from their membership of the Labour Party.
The driver of a car which crashed into a school, killing two 8-year-old girls in Wimbledon, won't face criminal charges after suffering a seizure. Claire Fremantle hadn't been previously diagnosed with epilepsy and has expressed her deepest sorrow. And Phil Foden has temporarily left England's Euro 2024 camp. The FA says the Manchester City midfielder, who starred in all 3 England matches, has returned to the UK for a pressing family matter. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 22 points at 82.25. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.18. LBC weather, patchy rain in the north pushing in from the west. Warm and muggy elsewhere and a low of 11 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. In the studio with me, to my left, Lord Karan Bilimoria. Crossbench peer, who's the founder and chairman of the Cobra Beer and a former president of the Confederation of British Industry. He's one of the few people that is actually forbidden to vote in this election because he's a member of the House of Lords. Do you feel cheated on that?
Disenfranchised.
Exactly. It's outrageous. Alastair Burt is not yet a member of the House of Lords, but should be. He is a former Conservative Middle East and North Africa Minister. He also served as International Development Minister. To my right is Zoe Grünewald, political journalist, who's the Westminster editor of the website The Lead. And next to her is Ali Milani, National Chair of the Labour Muslim Network. They're here to answer your questions. 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number too. And we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, firstly, a text question from Robert in Worcestershire. Is this betting row just Westminster fluff or a sign that standards in public service are at a real low point? Alastair Burt.
It's a mixture. I think it is really serious if people have inside information which they then use in order to make a bet on the certainty of winning. That's wrong in any context. And I think it's right that that's called out and that's a subject of investigation. However, to extend it to all betting on political issues, I think probably is not right. It's always, people have always had flutters. A number of candidates in the past have had a bet about themselves. They're not in a position to influence the result of that bet, and some people have done it as a form of insurance. Well, I may lose, but at least I'm going to make a few quid, and that sort of thing. So I think there is a risk.
Do you think that's okay?
Yes, I do. I don't think there's any harm in that. But I think what's happened this time is the risk of it being contaminated with inside knowledge. That's quite a different issue. That's wrong, and that should stop.
But surely, I mean, somebody in that position where they bet on themselves to lose, and that's obviously the allegation against a Labour candidate, you're cheating your own party by doing that, aren't you? Because you're not going to put your full effort into the election campaign.
Suppose I'm the Tory candidate in Well, it's hard these days. You can hardly find no-hope seats one way or the other because things change so much. But people have always done it. They're not then going to go out. You want to win a campaign. Nobody who bets against themselves doesn't want to win. That's more important than anything else. But you've had a side bet just to say, if I don't win, at least I've got sort of 100 quid coming in and we'll have a glass of champagne even if we've lost.
We don't say that to footballers, do we?
No, we don't, because footballs are in control of their own affairs. If they produce an own goal or if they do something on the field that leads to a goal against them or something else, that's quite right. But individual candidates, and how often in the past has this issue come up and someone has been accused of throwing the election that they lost because they had a bet? Can you think of any previous occasion before now? I can't.
No, nor can I, but I'm sure
go.
Maybe our listeners can if you can. 84850 is the text.
I think there's a risk of it being overblown, but at the heart of it is genuine seriousness. If you know something and you use that to put on a bet, that's criminal.
Why do you think it is, though, that the close protection officer has actually been arrested, whereas the 4 individuals who are alleged to have bet on the date of the election with insider knowledge, they haven't been?
I genuinely wouldn't know enough about the prosecution processes and why it's different for the Gambling Commission to do one thing and why the police have different rules. Maybe the police do have different rules. I genuinely don't know. It's outside my area of knowledge.
Zoe?
I think it's a sign that standards are low. I mean, I think we sometimes forget that politicians are supposed to display the highest standards. They are supposed to be exemplary in their behaviour. And I think anything like this, which causes the public to discuss, oh, should politicians be doing this? Doesn't it look bad? I think we should err on the side of caution. If it looks bad, if it looks like, and it brings the potential to bring politics into disrepute, if it makes people question, did so-and-so have insider knowledge? I think we should just avoid it. No one is forcing you to place a bet on your seat. You can still bet on the football. You can still bet on any sport you like. You don't have to bet on your career. And the very serious nature of politics in this country, there is a massive issue with trust. We know at this election in the country, when you talk to voters, they say they don't trust anyone. If I were a politician and I knew that, I would be trying to ensure that my behaviour at all times was to the highest standard.
Well, some breaking news for us all to get our teeth into. The Sun is reporting this tonight. Tory candidate Sir Philip Davis is accused of placing an £8,000 bet on himself to lose his seat. So, I mean, seriously. Sir Philip Davis is said to have wagered he will not hold his constituency, where he's defending a 6,242 majority. There is no suggestion the leading Tory, married to Cabinet Minister Esther McVey, has broken the law. But he did not dispute the sum involved, instead declaring it was nobody's business. Now, last night he said I guess that means tonight, he said he fully expected to lose, but insisted he'd done nothing illegal. I mean, where do we start with this? £8,000.
Yes, which is ridiculous.
I'd love to know the odds.
Yes, somebody somewhere would have had to accept that bet. Who on earth has accepted the bet?
A rather stupid bookmaker, you would have thought. Yeah. Ali?
Look, I think Zoe's right. This is a question of standards. The reality is a large percent of the public now think that politicians are a bunch of crooks. And it seems every week there's a new headline proving them right, whether it's lying, cheating, and now betting. We've spoken about footballers, and I think that's a really, really good example. The fact is, you're right that sometimes footballers can have an impact on the game. But the reality is the rules of the Premier League and the English League as a whole is footballers cannot bet on football full stop. Why? Because it influences and brings into disrepute the actual integrity of the game. That is the level at which we hold professional footballers. Now, our politicians who decide how our taxes are spent, where our military goes, the lives and livelihoods of millions of people in this country have a lower standard than Marcus Rashford, Raheem Sterling and Harry Kane. And that's really, really sad. And so the reality is, I know there'll be lots of politicians, and I've been seeing in the WhatsApp group saying, everybody does this, we put insurance against ourselves to lose so we win some money. First of all, that's really, really silly and an insult to their campaign teams. But the reality is, it is bringing into disrepute the integrity of our politicians and our elections, and it reaffirms what I hear on the doorstep every day, which is they're all a bunch of crooks.
There is a website called politicalbetting.com, which is very popular among political people. And when I used to look at it back in the noughties, there were quite a few MPs who would contribute to it. So it shouldn't really be a surprise that politicians do indulge in betting.
Well, look, when I stood against Boris, I religiously looked at the odds, and every time they shortened, I was like, this is brilliant, I'm doing a great job. I never in my dreams would have thought to put a bet on, let alone bet against myself. I mean, I'm superstitious enough. I didn't used to wear the rosette until polling day because I thought that would influence the result, let alone putting bets on against yourself. I think my campaign team would have thrown me out if I would have done that, let alone £8,000. I wouldn't be able to find £8,000, but good for him.
I mean, that is an incredible sum of money to put on anything.
But you still have to lose. Yeah. How little faith he has in himself.
Karan Bilimoria, this wouldn't happen in the Lords, would it?
Of course not. What I cannot understand is, what are these people thinking? How can you even think? One of the Prime Minister's right-hand people who's admitted, I made a grave mistake. Now, it's obvious he had insider knowledge. Now, insider trading in the stock market is a criminal offence. And here you know something, and you take advantage of it, and you place a bet.
Well, presumably because he thought there was no way that he would be found out.
Well, that's even worse. It's terrible. I'm sorry.
It's stupid. That's what it is.
It's worse than stupid. I mean, what were these people thinking? And to bet against yourself, I'm sorry. If you want to place a bet and you're desperate to gamble as a politician, bet on the racehorses. Yeah, but don't bet on...
You really want to lose money.
But don't bet on political matters. This is completely unacceptable. And what has happened with this election, and I saw this coming earlier, that with the Conservative Party in particular, it was one scandal after another. It was somebody misbehaving, somebody doing something wrong. And I told people, I said, watch it. Every single week something new will come out. I didn't expect in the middle of the elections for one betting scandal after another to come out. This is very bad for us. It gives such a bad impression of politicians. And unfortunately, I'm a member of Parliament, I'm a member of the House of Lords. We're all affected by this. And I'm sorry, I'm really annoyed with these people. I would never, this is not the way anyone should behave.
I said earlier that maybe governments that last longer than 10 years are subject to this sort of thing. If you think back to the end of the Major government,
yes, it happened, exactly.
There. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown had their own fair share of different scandals, and it's happening again now. We should have term limits for governments.
No, and of course here you had 18 years of Margaret Thatcher, John Major, then you had 13 years of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, then you had 14 years of Conservative government. So these phases we're going through. But the other thing is, why didn't Rishi Sunak do something about this quicker? Why did it take him so long to say we're no longer backing these two candidates? It should have been immediate. I'm sorry. He's even admitted it himself. And that also doesn't look good. That's not a good leadership at all to be able to do that.
I think the problem for a political leader is if you don't act immediately, you get reactions like you've just given. If you do act immediately, and then it may turn out not to be quite... Like, for example, Peter Mandelson's second sacking. I can't remember all the details now, but it turned out that he should not have been sacked. He wasn't guilty of what he was accused of, but Tony Blair, and well, probably Alastair Campbell more than Tony Blair, decided the optics were so bad he had to go. And that was a quick decision, and it turned out to be a wrong one. So you can't always say just because there's an accusation that someone should automatically get axed immediately.
When they admit it themselves?
It comes down at the end of the day to judgment. And I think in the cases of those who were accused of having inside knowledge, I think the judgment should have been made much more quickly. And again, as people have said, it wasn't a matter of waiting for the Gambling Commission. They, of course, must continue their inquiry. But you could just ask the people involved, did you place a bet on such and such a date about the election? And I think in those circumstances, the Prime Minister would have been entirely justified to say, well, that's it. It's a matter for him.
And Rishi Sunak must have had an idea of who would have been aware of the timing of the election, presumably, because he knew it was his decision. He must have been in control of what sort of people had access to that knowledge.
But what about Alastair Jack's situation? Because he placed a bet ages before.
He's the Scotland Secretary.
The Scottish Secretary has said he placed a bet in April or March about it. As we all know, there's been huge amounts of speculation about an election date. Is it wrong for somebody to place a bet on when an election might happen?
You're a cabinet minister. You're a cabinet minister. You're not there to place bets, whether it's against yourself or somebody else.
Oh, right.
You shouldn't be doing that. You should be well above
politicians,
that.
no bets on any political activity whatsoever.
Well, that's what Ed Davey is saying today.
Well, we'll see.
Especially if you're a cabinet minister.
I'm just interested in what will emerge. Now, firstly, the Labour leader is in a position where one candidate has been removed. Are we going to see more? Are we now going to ask for any candidate in a situation where they've placed a bet on themselves in the current election will now have to admit it because they'll have to stand down? Has that call gone out? I haven't seen it.
Well, I think the question was why didn't they act quicker? And what I've heard is that it's because it's a wide-scale issue, and there are many more to come that we haven't heard from. And the fear is that this is going to be a domino effect, where candidates from across political parties are suddenly going to be brought into the light as having betted on different political events, and that this is going to be a major scandal. I mean, it's ludicrous. I think anyone listening, I use quote unquote normal person that isn't in the political bubble as much as we are listening, will be flabbergasted as to, how can these politicians, let alone cabinet ministers who are involved in the decision making, who are placing political bets.
He's not involved in the decision making.
He will have been involved in conversations about when the election are happening, whether that's privately, informally, or formally. He will be in a position that no other person placing that bet in the country, most people, will be in, and that's a place of influence, and he's potentially making a profit out of decisions that are being made formally and informally in his sphere of circles. It's just crooked. It just makes them look like a bunch of crooks. And at a time when we're having to fight with people on the doorstep saying, listen, no, politics can be a force for good. There are people involved in politics who want to make things better. Scandal after scandal, whether it's lying, cheating or betting, coming out, just erodes public trust altogether. What do I say? What do I say to an ordinary voter who opens the door to me tomorrow and says, mate, they're just a bunch of crooks. They're betting on themselves. They're lying in public. What do I say to them? You're right.
Not for me to say.
They're right, aren't they? Because every scandal that comes about these days seems to be the stupidity of politicians and candidates, and crookedness, whether it's betting or lying.
I can remember during the expenses scandal, appearing on programme after programme, all throughout the media, trying to defend the honour of politicians. It was a pretty lonely task because politicians weren't doing it themselves. And I would say, look, they're not all crooks. Obviously, there's a few bad apples, but there are so many scandals now that it makes it very difficult to make that case to ordinary voters, because they will then quote all the different scandals back at you. I mean, Partygate, I think, in a sense, even though I would still argue that was not the most serious scandal in the world, I think the expenses scandal was far more serious. That is what everyone refers back to, and it sort of set the standard almost.
It's almost impossible to make the case that politics is a virtuous profession.
I'm not sure anyone's ever made that case. But, anyway,
I wish it was.
I think Barack Obama tried it, but even he, I don't think, quite managed it. Right, we will move on to other subjects. There are plenty of them to come. Robert, thank you for that question. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Alastair Burt, former Conservative Minister, Zoe Grünewald, who's political editor of the website The Lead. Now, I have to say, Zoe, I'm not familiar with this website. Just tell us what it's all about.
So we are a fairly new, I would say, about a year old.
I can forgive myself.
Yes, no, you can forgive yourself. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to pitch about it. So it's a fairly new micro mag, politics and culture. But we also have these really exciting local offshoots all across the Northwest. So we've got a Lancashire lead, a Blackpool lead, regional news, stories that matter to local people. And we have physical copies that have literally gone out in supermarkets today.
How old-fashioned.
Yes. Proper local news.
Great.
Because it's cool and people like it. Yeah, and it's, it's good old-fashioned journalism.
Have you brought one with you?
No, I don't have one because I'm not in the Northwest.
What's the obsession with the Northwest?
It's just where we feel like there should be more local news.
Where the action is,
yeah.
You know that. Great football club.
Oh, of course, you were.
Bury North.
Bury North.
I was.
Bury, we've got a lead Bury, so there you go.
There you go.
Yeah. Fantastic.
He's going to be a subscriber.
I hope so. I hope you all are.
Can I write for it?
But I'm interested in you doing this because you were on the New Statesman. Mm. I mean, some might say, is this a good career move?
Oh. Oh, what a question. Yes, I think it is. I mean, I think, A, it's a great team. B, it's a step up in responsibility. I get to do a bit more kind of editing and Westminster coverage. And I get to write about all sorts and talk to loads of interesting local journalists and hear about the issues that matter to people outside of London. OK. Ali Milani is here, National Chair of the Labour Muslim Network, which I guess does what it says on the tin.
Very much.
And Lord Karan Bilimoria, crossbench peer, founder of Cobra Beer. Right, Cliff in Harlow has sent in a text question. Is David Tennant telling Kemi Badenoch to shut up an example of what we've got to look forward to when the tolerant left take over? Now, the former Doctor Who star told the British LBGT Awards last week that he would like the Equalities Minister to shut up because of her stance on transgender issues. Both she and Rishi Sunak have hit back at David Tennant, and now Keir Starmer says he wouldn't have engaged in the way that he did, and that debates must be held respectfully. Ali.
Look, I find it amazing that Kemi Badenoch has the brass neck. Badenoch,
as she says herself, there's nothing bad in Badenoch.
Yeah, Badenoch has.
That's how I remember what it is,
and it will be how I remember it from every day from here on out. Her talking about toxicity of debates is remarkably courageous, if I'll use a more positive word. She has been at the forefront in the last at least 2 years in turning up the heat of the debate in our political discourse, in really going after some of the most marginalised people in our communities, from migrants to ethnic minorities. And so I think the fact that she has the sheer audacity to talk about toxicity of debate over David Tennant telling her to shut up, words I wouldn't have used, but the fact that she has the audacity to talk about toxicity is really, really unbelievable, given she and her ilk in the Conservative Party have been principally responsible for turning up the heat in political debates on really, really sensitive issues which make people less safe. So I have no time for Rishi Sunak or Kemi Badenoch talking to us about toxicity in political discourse.
But if this had been a right-wing politician telling Diane Abbott to shut up, I'm not sure that you would be adopting the same stance.
I would if Diane Abbott had taken our political discourse in the way that Kemi has over the last 2 years. If Diane had spoken in one iota the way that Kemi has about migrants in this country, about refugees in this country, supported policies like the Rwanda policy, which are not just flawed, but in my view racist, then I would be saying the same thing. The reality is that again, while I wouldn't have used the words David has, Kemi is responsible, and her wing of the Conservative Party are responsible for creating this really, really toxic debate. And let's remember, look, politicians say stuff in the media and on TV. The reality is the kind of discourse that perpetuates makes people less safe in our communities. When Boris Johnson used racist language against Muslims, we saw a 500% increase in Islamophobia, and I faced Islamophobia as his opponent and as a candidate in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. So these words and this toxicity of this debate has real-world impacts. We've had 2 MPs who have been murdered over our time in politics. And so it's not an abstract thing when we're talking about toxicity of the debate. She has been principally responsible for it. And again, while I wouldn't use David's words, it's unbelievable audacity for her to use words like toxicity.
But Zoe, the optics of a white middle-aged male telling the only black woman in the cabinet who's Equalities Minister to shut up, I mean, it doesn't look good, does it?
Well, I mean, I agree with Ali. I think, this is a consequence of the environment she's created. I do believe that. She has marginalised transgender people. She's turned up the heat in that debate considerably in a way that has really put people at risk, has really divided women and transgender people. When it didn't need to be like that.
It's not her that's done it. That's a debate that's going on all over the country.
But it is a consequence of the language she's used. I mean, she is the Equalities Minister.
And she would say she's defending women's rights that have been fought for over decades.
But the language she uses to talk about transgender people and has used in the past has been, in my view, inflammatory. Now, maybe shut up is not a particularly pleasant term to use, but if you are making people feel so angry and upset and like they are put in danger, I think I'm right in thinking David Tennant has a child who's non-binary. So this is a personal issue, and this is the real lived experience of people in this country. They feel genuinely affected and emotional by this because some people are targets of violence. Some people are, it really affects their mental health. It affects their lived experience when politicians are using them and their lived experience as a political football. And, I find it quite ironic that the right of the Tory party like to use identity politics when it suits them, but then when it doesn't, they say it's absolute rubbish and it shouldn't be used.
Yeah, it's woke. It's woke when it's used against them, but they're very happy to use it.
But on the other hand, if you remember when Gavin Williamson, when he was Defence Secretary, told Vladimir Putin to shut up and go away, he was universally traduced for that. I mean, in some ways I can understand it, but it's different values, isn't it? Sort of. I mean, I'm sure you would have ridiculed him for that, criticised him for that, and yet
for telling Vladimir Putin to shut up.
Yeah.
I think Vladimir Putin should shut up and other things. It's not the worst, most inflammatory language I've heard. Okay. I mean, she's a politician, and she has been very, very strong in the things she said. She's very, very. I think I'm sure there are far worse things that people have said to her, and I'm sure she doesn't like being called out by a celebrity in this manner. But I actually think, he has a point, and a lot of people agree with him.
Karan?
This country has always been respected as a country where you have free speech, where you have tolerance, fair play, and this is not. When you debate, this is a very sensitive topic, and it is absolutely understandable that people get very heated about it, but there's a way to go about it, and there's a way to debate this. And there's no question about it. Some of the policies of Kemi Badenoch and the extreme right wing of the Conservative Party, the Rwanda program. I mean, I think it is a ridiculous idea. I think it's unfair. I think it's inhuman. I think it is complete nonsense in terms of economically. Financially, it's costing hundreds of millions. And I don't think it'll work, and it'll probably break international law. I don't agree with it at all, but it can be debated. But you've got former cabinet ministers who dreamt of putting people on planes to Rwanda. Now, you could think, how could somebody even think like that?
Well, I agree with you on Suella Braverman, but, I mean, Suella Braverman herself is not white, so it's difficult to say that she and Kemi Badenoch approve of racist policies given their own race. Is it?
So to be racist, you have to be... What are you saying?
I'm saying that I think it's a bit odd to accuse people of colour just because they approve of the Rwanda policy of being racist, which is what effectively
I have not said
Zoe
that.
did.
I've not said that at all.
But you did, didn't you?
No, I did.
I don't know.
Ali, sorry.
Yeah, the policy is racist. Whoever implements that policy is racist, it's inhumane, it breaches international law. Whoever the politician is, it's racist.
Even if they are of the same race as people who might be deported to Rwanda?
Of course.
How does that work logically?
Well, racism is not just about words used, it's about structures, institutions, policies. If a policy is racist, no matter who the politician is that implements it, that's racism.
Okay, Alastair, do you agree with that?
I think we've wandered away from the David Tennant point. I would say he didn't just say shut up. Didn't he say that, in his ideal world, Kemi Badenoch wouldn't exist? And then he corrected himself quickly and said, I don't mean her any harm, I just wish she'd shut up. Now, defending that or minimising that because of Kemi Badenoch's previous stances, I think is slightly worrying. He shouldn't have said it. And I think that's straightforward. All the things you say about Kemi Badenoch's positions are perfectly justifiable in terms of part of the debate and everything else. Absolutely. But we're all at risk as politicians when we get into the business of so-and-so shouldn't exist, shut up, and then, well, it's all right to say that about so-and-so because look at them and all that. It's not all right at all. And I think we should be very straightforward that there are things that should not be said. Otherwise, you do get into the business of splitting hairs and saying, oh, well, they've brought it on themselves, and then we're down a slippery slope. So I don't think he should have said it. I don't support Kemi Badenoch's political philosophy. I'm very unlikely to vote for her as a future leader or anything else.
You astonish me.
But you know me too well. But I think there is a risk of saying, well, because it's her, it's sort of all right. And I just think that's wrong. And we should just say it was the wrong thing to say, argue about it as we rightly do, about her positions on various things. But let's be clear on the language and not give any sanction to anyone to go down such a road. That's my view.
I'm slightly surprised at her reaction to this because I think, given that she is somebody who has a colourful turn of phrase herself and it has actually become quite popular because of that, I think what she probably should have done is say, well, I'm the last person to criticise other people on what they say because I say what I think. He said what he thinks. I think he's wrong. Move on. That's probably the best way to react to it.
That's what I think. I think, she was very quick to evoke the identity politics that she often dismisses and she calls kind of wokeism, to kind of draw up all this anger about his comments when, in reality, she presents herself to be someone who is very thick-skinned and doesn't really buy into any of that and dismisses a lot of kind of left-wing people as sort of, what did she call him, rich, white, lefty, whatever the words were she used to call him on her Twitter. So I find it a bit kind of incongruent, and I'm not, I agree. I think we should be careful about the language we use when we talk about politicians. As Ali was saying, there is a hostile environment to politicians as well, and we've seen that play out in really violent, horrific things. And I would always be careful with my language. But my point is that there is a real-world impact to some of the policies that she's presided over, and that means that a lot of people with lived experience of this will be very, very upset.
Well, we'll move on to another subject after the news. It's going to feature Reform UK and George Galloway. What could possibly go wrong? It's 8:31. Let's get the latest news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
An inquest has found failures across the prison and probation service contributed to the death of Zara Alina in East London in June 2022. Jordan McSweeney had been released from prison 9 days before he murdered the 35-year-old. A member of the Labour Party has been suspended after a man was arrested over a honey trap plot in Westminster. Police are investigating after several political figures, including MPs, were targeted in a sexting scam. And the Crown Prosecution Service has decided not to charge the driver of a car which crashed into a school and killed 2 8-year-old girls. Claire Fremantle expressed her deepest sorrow after losing consciousness, having suffered her first ever epileptic seizure. LBC weather: patchy rain in the north, pushing in from the west tonight, and a low of 11 degrees.
This is LBC.
Apply.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Tinderbox.
8:34. We have Alastair, Burt, Zoe Grünewald, Karan, Bilimoria and Ali Milani with us in the studio. Paul is in Bolton in Greater Manchester. Hello, Paul.
Hello, everybody. Now, my question, the Reform Party and the Workers' Party are both similar to a degree as far as I'm concerned, because they're both trying to appeal to the socially conservative voters. Now, Reform has taken the polls by storm and they've been a massive part of the conversation. Yet the Workers' Party, they're nowhere in the polls and they're not being talked about, despite George Galloway saying a few months ago that they were going to change the political landscape. Why do you think this is?
Well, a simple reason would be that the Workers' Party is running in only 152 constituencies, while Reform UK is running in 609 across England, Wales and Scotland. But maybe others have other theories. Alastair?
I think the difference between the two, it seems to me, is George Galloway's party is identifying a particular part of the community, whereas the Reform argument goes rather broader in terms of values, and of course the publicity machine surrounding Nigel Farage is on a different level, even to that of George Galloway. So I think it's a more localised impact that George Galloway's party is having on a specific set of topics, whereas the Reform appeal is aimed at a wider set of targets.
Ali?
You know, what I think is really interesting is both Reform and the Workers' Party, and a lot of the other smaller parties as well, Greens being one of them, are highlighting what I think is a general dissatisfaction with the two mainstream parties. Now, Labour are on course for a stonking victory. I think everybody knows this. But the reality is, if the polls are to be believed, we're going into July 4th's election with the two major parties having the lowest vote share of any election, certainly in my lifetime, I think since the Second World War. And so there seems to be a general dissatisfaction with the two mainstream parties. I would certainly say my party need to enthuse voters more and have a bolder vision. But the reality is, I think what Reform are tapping into and what many of the other smaller parties are tapping into is a serious dissatisfaction with mainstream politics and the mainstream parties, and people are looking for an alternative. The reality is, I don't think our political system is perfect. I don't think our electoral system is perfect. Labour are on set to win 70% of the seats with 40% of the vote. I mean, that tells you everything you know about our electoral system. But there is a real angst and anger, I think, at mainstream politics, and we may see that play out in different constituencies with smaller parties.
Karan?
What this shows is our first-past-the-post system. You can have a party like Reform, which was UKIP one day, going back years, that can have 15% of the vote share, but maybe Nigel Farage will win his seat. If that, they might win one seat. The Workers' Party, basically George Galloway, might win his seat, but yet they can cause huge disruption by taking away votes in constituencies that could make the difference between a Labour or a Conservative making it or not.
What's wrong with that?
But here's the looking back, and I always say people overlook this. When David Cameron announced the referendum 8 years ago, what he completely miscalculated was in a first-past-the-post system, we have what I've just been talking about. But in a referendum, when UKIP were actually polling 14% of the vote, when you lose 52-48, without that 14%, UKIP made that Brexit happen. So it can be very effective if you have a referendum-type situation, completely ineffective and very disruptive in our first-past-the-post system.
But do you think the media are being fair to the Workers' Party? OK, they're only standing in a quarter of the seats that Reform are, but 152, that's more than most of the smaller parties.
I think our media, on the whole, are very, very fair, given the situation, giving a share of voice as much as possible beyond just the main two parties, the Conservative and Labour, let alone Lib Dems, let alone SNP, two parties like Reform Workers' Parties who get a share of voice, and I think that shows the fairness in our reporting system.
Sorry.
I think everyone's made good points. I think the point about the Workers' Party not standing in nearly as many seats as Reform is quite key. I also think there's money in Nigel Farage, that's bringing more publicity to Reform. We saw them kind of move up quite rapidly in the polling when Nigel Farage returned to the fray. I'd also say that actually I think George Galloway's Workers' Party is quite limited in its appeal. I mean, it's quite its policies they're not very coherent. So it seems very kind of left wing. But then on certain issues, on immigration, they're actually quite controlled and quite they sort of espouse different messages to different voters depending on what they think that day. And George Galloway, he's incredibly divisive. He's come out with some really homophobic comments, which I think have cost him quite a great deal of support. Other really problematic things he's said on sort of foreign policy issues. And I think there is a raft of voters who do find the Workers' Party's stance on Palestine appealing. Same with the Greens. But I think that's kind of where the appeal is kind of finishes, and then the rest of the Workers' Party, I don't really know what it stands for. Whereas Reform, it has more meaty policies, and it seems a bit more cohesive.
Well, you will have an opportunity to find out more about the Workers' Party's policies, because on Monday at 7:00, George Galloway will be in the studio, along with 3 leaders of other smaller parties. We're doing a smaller parties debate. We did this in the recent election as well. William Clouston from the SDP will be with us. David Curtin, the leader of the Heritage Party, which I have to say I'd never heard of before, but Alastair's not impressed by this. They're standing, I think, in over 40 seats. And I can never remember, Ali, help me out here, TUSC.
TUSC, the trade union. Socialist?
Dave Nellis is the leader, but he's unfortunately unavailable.
He's still going.
He's still going.
Wow.
So, you served in the Commons with him, didn't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, Dave was one of the original, and he was very determined. He would only accept the average working wage. He gave away the rest of his salary. He really believed in it.
Well, he's not going to be here on Monday because he's got a conflicting engagement, but his party chairman is going to be here instead. So do join us for that on Monday from 7:00 here on LBC. Now, let's take this question from Sammy, who says, George Galloway condemned Keir Starmer today for singling out asylum seekers from Bangladesh when talking about deporting migrants at the Sun debate. Why do you think Starmer did it? Now, just a bit of background to this. The Labour leader is facing a backlash from his own party too, speaking specifically about people who come to the UK illegally. The Labour leader said during a debate hosted by the Sun newspaper that, and I've seen the video from this, and I was actually quite shocked at how, it's very much pitched at Sun readers, I have to say. He says rather condescendingly, I'll make sure we got planes going off back to the countries where people come from. He then highlighted Bangladesh as an example, saying at the moment people coming from countries like Bangladesh are not being removed. Ali, when you were criticising Kemi Badenoch for some of her language.
Yeah, look, I was desperately disappointed, angry, hurt, as I'm sure many in our Bangladeshi community, most of whom are Muslim, will have felt. It wasn't just Keir who said that. Jonathan Ashworth also gave what I thought was a really upsetting interview where he also mentioned Bangladeshi communities. First of all, let's just say this is wrong. People from Bangladeshi backgrounds don't even appear in the top 10 in terms of migrants coming to this country. So the reason to single out the Bangladeshi community baffles me, is wrong, hurtful.
And he was talking about people coming here illegally. I know it's news to me, but this is a major problem in the Bangladeshi community.
It's not. And this is why, Iain, I've been on your show a lot, and it seems like every time I come on, there is a new story around Labour, and it always seems to be Muslims on the receiving end of inflammatory, offensive language by members of the front bench. And I think our party has to seriously reflect on it. I did speak about Kemi beforehand in terms of the racism, and it pains me to say it, and I hate saying it during a general election campaign as I'm knocking on doors, but there is a serious problem of racism in my party.
I mean, are you accusing Jonathan Ashworth and Keir Starmer of...
No, I'm saying the party in general, the way that we speak about Muslims is not good enough. Muslims from Bangladeshi communities, Palestinian Muslims, Muslims from all across the world who are British, who have who have ties to other parts of the world through familial links. These kind of comments are unacceptable. Now, I have to say the party has issued a statement saying that these comments were taken out of context, and that's
they
not
weren't. I've seen the video.
Yes,
that's the problem.
As have I, and I think there needs to be reflections on the amount of pain and hurt that this will cause Bangladeshi communities, many of whom have been loyal supporters of the Labour Party. The party won't do this, but I want to apologise to them as a member of the party. They deserve better than this. Our Bangladeshi communities deserve better than this. They are at the heart of the vibrancy that is in our communities. And if it's worth anything, which I'm sure it won't be, I hope they accept my apology. And I think they are owed apologies from senior members of our party.
Karan.
I'm really surprised by this because Keir Starmer has been so careful, and throughout this campaign he's been very, very careful, very cautious about what he said. He's an experienced lawyer, and I'm very surprised by what he said. And John Ashworth has always been seen as a friend to the Asian community. And when it comes to the Bangladeshi community, my late father, General Bilimoria, fought in the liberation of Bangladesh in 1971 and commanded his battalion of Gurkhas. This is a country that means a lot to me personally. Cobra Beer, we supply 5,500 restaurants, and the vast majority of them, Indian restaurants, curry restaurants, are actually owned and run by Bangladeshis. These are pioneering entrepreneurs who have contributed so much to our country. The fact that curry is a favorite food of the nation is thanks to the Bangladeshi community and their entrepreneurial spirit, their pioneering spirit, going into every corner of this country, making friends, winning customers, putting back into the community, contributing millions to the exchequer, billions of turnover, employing hundreds of thousands of people. We should be more grateful to the Bangladeshi community who've done a huge amount for the United Kingdom. So I'm very surprised by what has been said.
I'm sensing Ali wants to give you a hug.
Yeah, I mean, look, can I just say also, what really saddens me about all of this is that some people in our party, in the Labour Party, and actually British politics as a whole, has accepted this right-wing narrative on migrants and migration, whether legal or illegal. We have kind of given space to this idea that our economic woes and all these kinds of things are as a result of too many people coming to this country, and that's a really dangerous narrative for us to accept. I just wish, I dream of a political party, mainstream politicians having the basic courage to make the positive case for immigration, the positive case for the people like your father, like my family, who came to this country, who have made such a positive contribution, who are part of the vibrancy of our city of London and our country. I think we are waiting, the country is begging for a politician who has the basic courage to stand up and make the positive case for these people who are as part of this community, as part of our country as anyone else. But our politicians in general, as a mainstream, are cowards. They're afraid of the response that they're going to get, and they don't have the basic courage to make the positive case.
We did a phone-in not that long ago about why is there nobody putting the positive case for immigration, and that there just isn't. I mean, various pressure groups do, but you don't find any mainstream or very few.
The House of Commons is full of cowards.
The Greens do, but and they do quite strongly when they were in their TV debates. I feel Stephen Flynn did make quite.
This current government, I'm sorry to say, have been absolutely anti-immigration. They've got a hostile approach to immigration, to students, international students. I co-chair the All-Party Parliamentary Group for International Students. I'm president of the UK Council for International Student Affairs. Tomorrow I'll be speaking at our annual conference. And what does this government do? It takes away the right for them to bring dependents. We're going to lose really top MBA students, 25% of them bring dependents. The international students, they want to take away the 2-year post-graduation work visa. We include them in the net migration statistics. International students should be...
We're running very late, Alastair, if you can be brief.
Just very brief. I chair a university and I entirely agree with my colleague. Some of the controls on visas are going to be very hurtful and they're not aimed in the right way. But I would say... the impact of those who've come to the United Kingdom with specialist skills, who've worked in the health service, I was Minister for Health for a period of time, has been of massive benefit to the United Kingdom. And there's a lot of Conservatives, there's a lot of MPs who recognise that. There is an issue with numbers. And I don't think any serious political party is standing saying there can be no immigration controls, there can be no limits or whatever. If that's the case, then people have to devise a policy in order to deal with that. And that actually is the difficult thing. And that's where people are cowardly, trying to work out, when you get the legal routes and they're oversubscribed, what actually you're going to do. Now, it won't be the Conservative Party's problem in a week's time, but it will be the problem for a Labour government, and it's going to be quite difficult. And I think language is really going to matter. I come back to the same thing. Language is going to matter, and people handling this with great care and being able to see the whole of the issue rather than just burrow into one corner or another and complain about the others.
Now, just in the interest of balance, Labour have put out a statement saying Keir has proudly supported the Bangladeshi community across the UK, who make an enormous contribution to our country. This clip has been edited to make it look as though Keir Starmer is suggesting a repatriation of British Bangladeshis. It is misinformation. In fact, Keir is referring to Labour's long-established policy of returning those who don't have the legal right to be in the UK to safe countries. Bangladesh was only used as an example, as there's already a bilateral agreement between the two countries. It's 8:49.
Britain decides. Follow the general election and have your say only with LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 8:51 on LBC. We have with us in the studio Alastair, Burt, Zoe Grünewald, Lord Karan Bilimoria and Ali Milani. Right, a text question from Pierce in Clapham. Are England football fans, he puts fans in inverted commas, in Germany, bringing the dark old days back? Now, spectators among the England fans section for last night's match at Euro 2024 threw empty beer cups at manager Gareth Southgate while he was on the pitch after the 0-0 draw with Slovenia, thanking them for their support. Southgate said he understands fans' anger about the team's performances, while the Football Association looks set to face punishment from the Euros organiser, UEFA, for the throwing of those cups by England fans. Well, I think compared to what England fans have done in previous championships, that is fairly tame beer, if I may say so. But it's still rather nasty, isn't it? Do you think the dark old days are coming back, Alastair? I know you're a keen football fan.
By and large, they're not. And the behaviour of fans has changed markedly over the last 20 years. Tremendous work done by the Football Supporters Association in concert with diplomatic representatives in the various countries where these championships are held. And of course, in recent years, we've seen the problems at Wembley the other year when it was not English fans involved or anything like that. But a lot of work has been done to curb it. I think it's always wrong to throw things onto a football field. It was wrong last night, and the supporters should not do it. There's no excuse. By contrast, as a Scot, the Scottish fans have been a credit in Germany, and knowing what they knew.
Are you claiming to be a Scot?
Fathers from Fife, mothers from Dundee.
Okay. Who knew?
I bear the scar. Alastair, James, Hendry, Burt. It's a bit of a clue.
Okay. All right.
And their behaviour has been great, even in the difficult times. But no, there's no excuse for it. But in general, football support abroad has improved really quite markedly, and this was a lapse, and it shouldn't have happened.
Ali.
As you know, we've spoken about it before. You gave me a hard time about my football opinions and my football fandom, but
I don't remember this. You obviously scarred you.
Well, I'm a Man United season ticket holder who lives in London.
Oh, yeah. Well.
So there you go. But look,
they all do.
There were a couple of. There's a lot of us on the train. There were a couple of cups thrown at Gareth. That's not the sort of fandom that I support. I actually think in tournament you absolutely get behind the team and the manager. There's been a problem across the tournament though, and it's not just England. We've seen cups being thrown at the Croatian team. I remember watching
the son
game.
of the Serbian president was detained, wasn't he?
I think the German officiating team and the organising team have said that they're considering stopping serving the alcohol in the cups in the stadiums to stop this being a problem. Now, I don't think we're anywhere near years gone by where I hear horror stories about what it was like being in stadiums, the violence, the hooliganism, the racism particularly. And I can say from all the England games and the football games I've been to, I've hardly ever seen anything like that. But I do think we have to be vigilant, and I do think we have seen some streaks of that behaviour coming back, not least the Euro final that was held in Wembley, which was embarrassing for us.
Well, I was there. I witnessed all of that rampage. I was literally about 10 yards away from it when they broke through the barriers, bizarrely standing beside Nigel Farage. We hadn't gone to the match together. We just bumped into each other, and suddenly we heard these crash... No, are you accusing me of lying, Alastair? And suddenly we heard these crash barriers and looked round, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
And look, people might scoff at this, but I think or might think that this isn't a huge issue, but I think it's really important we safeguard the game, because football plays such an important part in the lives of so many people. It stopped me in joining gangs and being drawn into violence when I was growing up. It was such a fundamental part of my upbringing, and it's so important that we preserve the game and we fight against going back to the old days of hooliganism, that I think we need to be very, very vigilant. I don't think we're headed that way again, but I think if we're not vigilant and if we don't watch out for it, we will see a slide back towards hooliganism. And so it's important that we talk about these issues as they come up and act upon them.
Sorry.
Well, as the only woman on the panel, maybe I should make the point that you don't get this kind of behaviour when the Lionesses are
that was so pious.
It's quite brilliant. And they win.
True.
And they win as well, added bonus. I tend to think that, and I'm not going to profess to be the biggest football fan in the world. I do tend to just engage when we're, in the Euros and the World Cup, whatever.
Take you to Old Trafford next week.
But
London Stadium is pointed to.
I do feel like the kind of anger and the frustration we're seeing from football fans is somewhat a mirror of the general national mood. And I think it's kind of just bad timing that this is all happening. We've got a general election, we've got the football on at the same time, and everybody, when you speak to voters, when you speak to football fans, everybody's just exhausted and fed up with the state of the country and fed up with things not working. And I think, unfortunately,
that's because of people like you talking the country down, Zoe.
Well, maybe so. Maybe I should stop. I said the Lionesses were pretty good, didn't I? Yes. I just think there's a general frustration and anger, and I completely agree with Ali and Alastair. I just wish we didn't take it out on our lovely players.
Karan.
There's no excusing bad behaviour, and that's unacceptable. But you can understand people's frustration, because on paper we have the best team in this competition, and actually deserve to win the Euros. And I'm rooting.
Not on current performances.
Things can only get better.
Well,
and what I will say is this: that I often say that the UK has the strongest combination of hard and soft power, and one of the best examples of our soft power are our top football teams like Chelsea, the hundreds of millions of followers, and Man United, hundreds of millions of followers around the world, and we have the best football league in the world by far.
But maybe we should stop selling off these community assets to foreign countries and states as well. That infuriates me.
That's another subject, but I'm going to make a prediction because people in the Labour Party love to say that we only win the World Cup when there's a Labour government. I can see what's going to happen now. We're going to smash the qualifying, the knockout stages, and England will win the Euros a week after Labour win the election. So Keir Starmer can proudly say, see, this only ever happens under a Labour government. But there we go. Of course, it happened under a Conservative government for the Lionesses, Zoe. That's something that I'm sure you were cheering.
Yes.
Right, our fun question from Olivia in Leeds. What should I spend my time doing on Sunday rather than watching another dreary England match? Any advice from any of you, Zoe?
You should re-watch the Lionesses highlights on YouTube and go to the pub.
Ali?
Join me on the doorstep. And
You're not seriously going to go canvassing during this match?
Well, I had planned to. I'm not going to now. I'm definitely going to watch the game. But I think if they want to join on the doorstep, there'll be Labour canvassers all across the country who are probably getting a response much worse than what David Tennant said at the tour if they knock during an England game.
Yeah, the second word might be off. Alastair?
You should watch, because you never know. And there's always a moment of magic in almost any football game that would make you glad you watched it. And if you go for a walk or if you go canvassing and you miss a great England performance, you'll never forgive yourself. Watch the game.
Karen?
You've got to watch the game. In the words of Saint Jerome, good, better, best, never let it rest until our good is better and our better is best, and we will win.
What a way to end the programme. We like to always end on an uplifting note, and you have provided it. Thank you all very much, Alastair, Burt, Zoe Grünewald, Lord Karan Bilimoria and Ali Milani. On Monday's programme, we have Femi Olawole taking part. Femi always sort of arouses a lot of emotion in people, doesn't he? But I think he's very entertaining, so he'll be with us on Monday. Now, after 9 o'clock, nearly half of long-term antidepressant users can stop using the medication with GP support and access to internet or telephone helplines alone, according to a new study. Scientists found that more than 40% of people involved in the research who were well and not at risk of relapse managed to come off the drugs with advice from their doctors. But do you think those very same doctors are often prescribing too many antidepressants, prescribing them all too easily? And what's your experience of antidepressants? Have they, or do you think they've actually saved your life? Or do you wish that you'd never been put on them, but you can't get off them? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, an inquest jury's found failures by multiple agencies contributed to the death of Zara Alina, who was murdered as she walked home. Jordan McSweeney had been freed from jail just 9 days before he